What's in a question? Maybe just about everything important. A smart and sharp question should strike up a more engaging conversation. Today, let's talk about dink once more. If you haven't heard the term, let us do a refresher. Diane joins us in the studio for more. Good morning.
Good morning, Lena. Happy Friday.
Oh, you're right. It's a Friday.
Yes.
We've made it, guys.
Yes. Do you have any special plans for the weekend?
Sure. Family time.
That's good.
I mean, we all need it, right?
Of course.
So I don't want to do any cooking. So going to whatever restaurant is open and ready for reservations. It's really hard to get reservations on the weekends these days.
That is so true.
So I should plan ahead, like Diane.
Right. Like today. Right after the show.
Yeah, you think?
Yes.
Okay, I'll give it a go and let our listeners know on Monday whether or not I was successful.
Right.
All right, let's jump into today's question of the day. Can you extend it once more to all of our listeners?
All right. So question, are you better off with a child or without a child?
It's kind of a loaded one too, isn't it?
Right. I mean, to start with describing what DINK stands for.
Sure.
DINK with DINK is an acronym that stands for double income, no kids, or dual income, no kids.
So you're married, you have a partner, but you have no children.
Right. It describes a couple without children living together while both partners are receiving an income. Because both of their wages are coming into the same household, they're more free to live more comfortably than couples who live together and spend their money on raising their children. Now, the most shocking part was this. When I was searching for things, the term was coined at the height of yuppie culture in the 1980s.
The 80s?
I mean, all this time, I thought the word was something super new, super millennial, Gen Z-like.
Yeah.
But the Great Recession solidified the social trend back in 1980s as more couples waited longer to have children or choose not to have children at all.
I mean, not to overgeneralize, but just for context, in comparison to the boomers, where you were encouraged to have children, that was good for the economy, that was good for the family. So there was a social construct and a respect for that. And then came the Great Recession, where it was not a sound decision to have kids anymore. And what's happening in, I think, global economic setting is remarkably similar.
Exactly.
All economists tell us that we're headed into a recession if we're not already there, that is. And so I can see why the trends keep reoccurring.
Exactly.
So it's not new. I'm sure the recent economic downturn all around the world is also driving up the dink population once more.
Of course. Well, let's take a look at the U.S. first. A Pew Research Center survey finds that a rising share of U.S. adults who are not already parents say that they're unlikely to ever have children.
Ever.
And their reasons range from just not wanting to have kids to concerns about climate change and the environment. Just on a side note here, Lena, did you know that there are different types of dink variation? I thought that was amusing.
Okay, now I'm even more confused.
Right.
I thought dink was just one big umbrella term and we call it a day. But apparently there are... What? Dinky?
Yes, under the dink, there are words like dinky, jink, dinkwad, or yappy.
Okay, dinkwad is it's kind of fun to say.
Right, so dinky means double income, no kids yet, implying that the couple in question is childless only temporarily and tends to have children later rather than eschewing having children entirely.
So the most flexible of all the dinks.
Yes, they're the optimistic group, right? Jink means green inclination, no kids, referring to those who choose not to have children for environmental reasons. So I just said that the U.S. couples are thinking about not having children because of their concerns about climate change and the environment. Then they're called jink.
Okay.
Right? And now dinkwad means double income, no kids, with a dog. So I think this is a majority with what's happening these days, right?
Yeah, increasingly people in Seoul are having dogs but no children.
Right.
And double income, no kids with dog is dinkwad.
Yes, and some marketers have proposed yappy, meaning young, affluent parent, adapted from yuppie as a term to describe similar couples who do have children.
Okay, so yappies. Oh, and it has such a bad connotation, doesn't it? Like if someone is yappy, they're probably annoying. But young, affluent parents, that's the new term.
Right.
All right, so then what is the status quo in the States right now as we speak when it comes to any variation of dinks? Tell us numbers.
So going back to the topic, some 44% of non-parents ages 18 to 49 say it's not too or not all likely that they will have children someday, an increase of 7 percentage points from the 37% who said the same back in 2018 survey. Meanwhile, 74% of adults younger than 50 who are already parents say that they are unlikely have more kids.
Okay, so maybe one is good enough, for example. And then there's a gross majority that say that it's kind of unlikely that they would have any kids.
Right.
What about South Korea? Is there a common theme here compared to the United States?
Definitely. South Korea is heading in the same direction as the increased number of people opting for DINK. More than half of those in their 20s were found to be positive about the DINK idea. According to the Korea Development Institute's Economic Information Center, the percentage of those in their 20s who agree to marry and not have children rose 23.3 percentage points from 29% in 2015 to 52% in 2020. So just in 5 years, the number jumped drastically, right?
Maybe even doubled, right?
A little, about double, right? The increase was larger than the 7 percentage points increase in the consent rate from 21% to 28% in the older generation during the same period.
Did the Institute at least try to explain then the reason behind the surge? I guess some obvious ones come to mind. The economy's unstable, housing prices unaffordable, things like that.
Of course, the reality issues, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious. All the cost that comes along with raising a child, of course. The think tank said the change in perception that childbirth after marriage is an option rather than a necessity reflects the economic difficulties of raising children. The reason is the same with the U.S. birth rates. It dropped during the COVID-19 pandemic amid the twin public health and economic crisis, lending evidence to predictions from early on in the outbreak that economic uncertainty might trigger a baby bust. This continued the downward trend in the U.S. fertility rates, which were already at a record low before the pandemic began.
It just exacerbated an existing situation. The thing about becoming a DINK couple, I mean, it should be just left to the couple and the partner's decisions. But of course, we live in a society entangled in social norms.
And a lot of different opinions from other people.
Some might want to just brush under the rug, but it's difficult because you got to have some friends and colleagues, right? Unless you're going to live just on an island. And unfortunately, DINK couples will have to inevitably face your life gets boring without kids from the elders of the family. Friends who do have kids, sometimes well-intended. Other times, I think, is out of jealousy because you don't have as much freedom if you have children,
That's
too.
true.
We're only human, so we can have these different emotions. But to see if this is in fact true, does life really get boring without kids? There was a study to show the pros and cons of having children as opposed to not having them.
Yeah, so the Joseon Health Media recently wrote an article showing the merits and demerits of having kids. They divided into 3 parts to consider, which include physical health, marriage satisfaction, and psychological health.
It's so funny, right? First, it's about my physical health. How healthy am I? Marriage satisfaction. Are you happy with just you and your partner? And then your psychological health. Okay, I feel like we need maybe a little bit of drum roll. Okay, a couple with children or a couple without children. Which of them were healthier and happier?
So, well, for the first factor, physical health, it was found that there are risks to women's bodies whether you have children or not. So it's similar. It was a tie. First of all, having children affects a woman's body more than a man's, of course. Physically, women who do not have children are more likely to develop ovarian and breast cancer than women who have children. This is because the menstrual cycle and those aforementioned diseases are related. As the menstrual cycle repeats, cell changes continue to occur during ovulation, making gene mutations more likely, and those mutated cells have higher chance of developing into cancer cells.
Okay, so having the childbirth itself is strenuous on a woman's body, to say the least. The flip side of that is just because you don't have children doesn't mean you're well off. In fact, it can make you more prone to certain cancer types.
So Professor Kim Min-gyun of the Department of Breast Surgery at Chungang University Hospital said the fewer menstruation, the lower the risk of ovarian cancer and breast cancer, which supports the idea that women with kids would have less chance of getting those cancers. And also a professor of OBGYN at Chungang University Hospital backs this idea, saying epithelial ovarian cancer accounts for 90% of all ovarian cancers, and it mainly occurs in non-pregnant women.
Okay, so like you said, it's a tie. Whether you have a kid or not, women's health is unfortunately exposed to a little bit more vulnerabilities than our partner males. However, that does not mean women who have given birth birth are actually safe from these diseases.
Right. So conversely, women who have given birth are also susceptible to diseases.
Okay.
Professor Ian ji said cervical cancer is a disease in which fertility can be a risk factor. In addition, uterine prolapse, vaginal cancer, and vulvar cancer are diseases that are at high risk for those who have had childbirth.
Okay, so as Diane was mentioned, it's a tie for physical health.
Yes.
Next is marriage satisfaction.
Right. So marital satisfaction is also a factor that can affect mental health.
Okay.
According to a recent study conducted by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs on childless couples and married couples with children, marriage satisfaction among childless couples was higher.
I think you would have less to fight about.
Right.
You care so much about your children and you give them the world, but how you give them the world might be different.
Right.
I mean, beyond being partners, you have entire lives you've led for 20 to 30 years. And so meeting in the middle and saying, our ways can have a healthy medium sounds just difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of new. So let's take a look at why.
Right. I mean, this is something new because we always think or we always hear that having children would bring the marriage happier, right?
It brings the couple together and closer.
Right. It's camaraderie, right?
It's camaraderie. Yeah, I think so. That was the consensus. But there's reasons otherwise.
Yeah, so the reason for this result is that the value of childbirth is different from the past. Professor Yoon Dae-hyun of the Department of Psychiatry at Seoul National University Hospital said, sacrifice for the family is not considered the same value as in the past. To the extent of experiencing career interruption and parenting stress and having children, the value of life and individual values have become more important. So therefore, the result that having childless couples, they have higher marriage satisfaction.
Okay. Remember what Junha said? I thought that was really interesting, that willpower is overrated.
Right.
That kind of stuck with me because there's an entire generation before us that thought willpower, powering through, sacrifice for the family is kind of a pillar of success.
Right.
As, I don't know, maybe the breadwinner of the family too. But it's a different times, I suppose.
Right. I mean, the parents have to be happy and satisfied in order to have a happy family.
Right. And that's more societally respected.
Right.
I think there was kind of this like taboo nature to it just decades ago that maybe that was a luxury.
Right.
Especially when the economy was growing in South Korea.
Exactly.
But not anymore. Now, lastly, the psychological part. People often hear that dink couples will get lonely easily because they have no kids, no camaraderie in the later years.
Yes.
Was this found to be true?
So when you have children and have a family, you can be relatively less lonely than when you don't. Of course, because you have this support system going on next to you.
You have
right?
more people.
Yeah, more people, literally. However, this feeling of loneliness does not necessarily arise simply because you don't have children, right? There are other many factors that leads to loneliness, right?
We're all born alone. We're all
Right.
designed to be lonely to a certain extent. And I think maybe sometimes it's expectations that you won't be lonely if you have a family.
Right.
You won't be lonely if you have a partner. That's also a misconception. Wouldn't it be the worst thing if I'm surrounded by people
And you still feel
and I
lonely.
still feel lonely?
Right, that would be the worst part.
So maybe that's a personal thing.
Right.
Huh.
I mean, Professor Yoon Dae-hyun also said everyone can feel lonely even after getting married and having children, which is worse, right? Experts say that from a mental health point of view, parenting stress is also a problem that couples with children may experience more than childless couples, but the size of parenting stress will vary depending on how rewarding and valuable the process is. As a result, as there are many variables in the loneliness and parenting stress that couples feel in terms of mental health, it's still very difficult to compare and say who is more difficult because it just comes down to very subjective feelings and opinions.
Yeah, and your personal journey, right?
Right.
You don't know what the ups and downs are for husband and wife, husband. You have no idea. And so I know this is probably not the answer that our listeners were seeking for.
Exactly.
I think we always want silver bullets or a
Right.
simple solution, but there is none. If there is a takeaway that Diane has summarized for us today is that having children does not determine your health and happiness completely.
Right.
So whether to dink or not is up to your individual choice. Should society be more respectful of these variations? Yes. And we're making baby steps.
Right, to each their own for sure. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to one's preferences and one's choice, right? We should all respect that and support for that.
We should put that up on a banner for our question unboxing segment. To each their own. We just provided with just all the information.
Right.
Thanks, Diane. Have a safe weekend.
Have a good weekend.